The soft glow of early morning sunlight streamed through the cafe's tall windows, casting golden rectangles across the warm wooden floor. The smell of freshly ground coffee beans mingled with the faint aroma of pastries, creating a comforting warmth that contrasted sharply with the chill outside. Sarah Hayes pushed open the glass door and stepped into the small San Diego cafe, the bell chiming lightly behind her. She wrapped her hands around her tote bag as if it were a shield, though she didn't need it. Today, like most mornings, she craved anonymity, a brief respite from the expectations and chaos of her military life. To the casual observer, she looked entirely unremarkable. A woman in her early 30s, dressed in a gray sweatshirt, worn jeans and sneakers, with her dark hair pulled back into a simple ponytail. There were no medals pinned to her chest, no insignia to betray her past, no telltale signs that she had spent years commanding squads in hostile territories around the world. She moved with quiet precision, almost like a predator masked in plain sight. Yet those who had served with her knew the truth. Sarah Hayes was a Navy officer, a decorated lieutenant commander whose calm demeanor concealed decades of combat experience, advanced tactical training, and a mind sharpened by high-stakes decisions in life-and-death scenarios. She chose a corner booth near the window, her back against the wall, so she could observe the cafe without being immediately noticed. This position was deliberate. Years of training had taught her the value of situational awareness. Even here, hundreds of miles from a war zone, habits learned in survival and combat had become second nature. She set her tote bag carefully on the seat beside her, unzipped it just enough to reveal her notebook, and pulled out a phone that had seen more action overseas than most civilians' entire lives. The cafe itself was modest but charming. The wooden tables bore the marks of countless conversations, the chairs slightly uneven, as though they had weathered years of daily use. A barista with a bright smile moved behind the counter, expertly preparing drinks, while a soft playlist of acoustic guitar and jazz trickled from speakers hidden in the corners. The ambient murmur of conversation, the occasional hiss of the espresso machine, and the subtle clinking of mugs created a rhythm that Sarah found comforting. For once, she was a civilian. For once, the war zones, the operations, the briefings, and the endless pressure of leadership could remain distant. Yet, as much as she tried to enjoy this moment, a tiny part of her remained vigilant. Years of experience had taught her that danger often appeared when least expected. She wasn't paranoid. She simply recognized patterns, the subtle signs that most people overlooked. The way someone's gaze lingered a moment too long, the shuffle of boots approaching, the almost imperceptible tension in a group of strangers. Her eyes flicked casually around the room, scanning without obvious movement, noting the regulars and the newcomers, the barista wiping down tables, the man reading the newspaper at the far corner. Sarah sipped her coffee, black and strong, letting the bitter warmth wake her senses fully. It was a ritual, a moment of calm before the day's responsibilities intruded. Outside, the streets of San Diego were just starting to stir with early commuters, the sun climbing higher in the sky. Traffic hummed faintly in the distance, a city awakening to its daily grind. She loved mornings like this, the kind that felt deceptively ordinary, where the world seemed predictable, safe, and stable. But life had a way of shattering that illusion, and Sarah had learned to accept it. She had spent years in foreign ports, dealing with uncertainty, threats, and the unexpected. She had navigated ambushes, improvised explosive devices, hostile interrogations, and tense negotiations with people whose lives balanced precariously on the edge of violence. She had carried the weight of responsibility for dozens of lives, making split-second decisions that could mean survival or death. All of that experience had shaped her, honed her instincts, and trained her to read the smallest details in any environment. And yet, today, she simply wanted coffee. The door chimed again, and Sarah's instincts flared instantly, subtle but undeniable. A group had entered, 3 men, laughing loudly and drawing attention to themselves. Their energy was aggressive, almost predatory, though nothing about them screamed danger to the untrained eye. They were tall, muscular, and confident, moving with the casual arrogance of people used to intimidating others. The kind of people who thought the world was theirs for the taking, who underestimated anyone who didn't shout or boast. Sarah's eyes followed them as they approached the counter, and she noted their behavior with detached efficiency. One of the men spoke sharply, gesturing with his hands as he ordered coffee. Another leaned against the wall, scanning the room. The third simply stood near the entrance, blocking the natural path in case anyone tried to leave. They were a unit in miniature, moving with subtle coordination, a rhythm she recognized instinctively. She didn't panic. She observed. Her hand rested casually on the table, near the edge of her tote. She didn't reach for anything yet. She didn't need to. Awareness was her first weapon. The men didn't yet notice her fully. To them, she was just another woman, enjoying her morning. That mistake, she knew, would be costly if they decided to cross a line. Sarah allowed herself a small, almost imperceptible smile. She liked testing herself in these scenarios, even in small ways. A cafe in San Diego was not a battlefield, but the principles were the same: positioning, observation, timing, patience. She sipped her coffee again, slow and deliberate, letting the rich bitterness fill her senses, centering herself. She was calm, controlled, ready. The barista, oblivious to the tension, placed a fresh pastry on the counter and called out an order. The aroma of baked cinnamon and sugar mingled with the coffee, grounding Sarah for a moment. For all the chaos she had seen in her life, these small, ordinary details, a cafe, a cup of coffee, the murmur of conversation, were worth savoring. She allowed herself to believe, just for a moment, that the world was safe here. Yet, as she watched the trio laugh and nudge each other, lingering too long near the tables, a familiar sense of anticipation crept up her spine. This wasn't paranoia. This was trained intuition, a subtle recognition that something was about to happen. She didn't yet know what, but she could feel the currents shifting, the invisible tension threading through the cafe. Every muscle in her body prepared itself, honed over years of readiness for whatever challenge might appear next. Sarah Hayes had learned long ago that danger rarely announced itself. It didn't knock politely or wait for permission. It arrived suddenly, often in ordinary places, testing her discipline, judgment, and courage. And today, in the seemingly quiet corner of a sunlit cafe, she sensed that lesson was about to be tested again. She adjusted her posture slightly, sitting upright yet relaxed, exuding an unremarkable presence that masked an extraordinary capability. The trio had not yet identified her as a threat, and that was precisely how she wanted it. To the untrained eye, she was merely enjoying her coffee. To Sarah, she was already planning, calculating, preparing for the possibility that the morning would no longer be ordinary. And in that fleeting moment of calm, she allowed herself one final sip of coffee, savoring the warmth, the flavor, and the illusion of peace. Then she set the cup down, her eyes sliding toward the newcomers at the entrance, ready for whatever would come next. The quiet morning was about to end. The cafe seemed to hum with ordinary life, but Sarah noticed every detail with the precision only years of military experience could teach. The 3 men had settled near the counter, ostensibly ordering coffee, yet their movements betrayed a pattern she recognized immediately: coordinated, confident, and aggressive. They were sizing the room, assessing everyone in it, with eyes that flicked from patron to patron. But most importantly, their gaze kept returning to her corner. She had anticipated this, though she gave no outward sign. She sipped her coffee slowly, deliberately, letting her calm exterior conceal the storm of awareness inside her mind. To anyone watching, it seemed as if she were absorbed in her phone, scrolling idly through emails and news headlines. Her fingers moved with a casual rhythm, yet her mind catalogued every detail of the three intruders: their height, build, the subtle tension in their shoulders, the way their eyes scanned, the way they tested the space around her. She recognized the type: immediately young men who thought physical presence alone could intimidate. They didn't realize they had wandered into a space dominated by experience, discipline, and a mind trained to anticipate threats. The first man, tall with a square jaw and a tattoo curling along his forearm, nudged his friend as he leaned casually against the counter. He glanced toward Sarah's corner again, lingering a moment longer than necessary. Sarah's eyes met his for a fraction of a second, not in challenge, but in observation. Most people would have looked away, but she studied him carefully. The moment passed, and he smirked, misinterpreting her steady gaze as hesitation or fear. His arrogance was palpable, almost tangible, and it made her pulse steady with readiness rather than anxiety. The second man, stockier and broader, shifted his weight and glanced toward the window, pretending to watch the street outside. In reality, his peripheral vision was trained on Sarah's booth, mapping her movements, judging her reactions. The third, a wiry man with dark hair and a sneer that seemed permanent, leaned near the entrance, subtly positioning himself to control the flow of anyone who might enter or exit. Their strategy was instinctive, territorial, calculated, confident. But they hadn't yet realized the magnitude of the miscalculation they were making. Sarah allowed herself a small, nearly imperceptible smile. Years of experience had taught her that people revealed their intentions unconsciously long before they acted. These men were predictable. Their arrogance and overconfidence were visible in every gesture. She took mental notes. The first man's dominant arm was his right, meaning any strike or grab would likely come from that side. The stockier man had a slight limp on his left leg, slowing his mobility. The third man relied heavily on intimidation rather than physical skill. These details were critical because when the moment arrived, she would need to act decisively, using both strategy and precision. She sipped her coffee again, deliberately slow, as though unbothered by the looming threat. The cafe around her continued to hum with life, oblivious to the tension coiling in the air. A man at a nearby table laughed quietly at a text message. A barista polished a counter, unaware of the silent calculations taking place in the corner. And yet, Sarah's attention never wavered. Every movement of the three men was catalogued, every glance noted, every subtle shift in posture analyzed. To her, the ordinary and the dangerous existed simultaneously, layered in the same space. The first man moved closer to Sarah's booth, letting his hand brush the back of a chair near her table. He glanced down at her phone, smirking. "What are you looking at, sweetheart?" he said, voice low but audible. Sarah didn't respond immediately. She allowed herself one slow exhale, eyes never leaving his. The calm, deliberate steadiness unnerved him without her making a move. He mistook the hesitation for weakness, for a moment thinking she might cower or comply. But that was a misreading of the situation entirely. Sarah had no intention of fear. She had intention of control. The stockier man chuckled darkly and leaned forward slightly. "Yeah, you better answer, lady. Don't ignore us." His grin was meant to intimidate, but Sarah noted the slight hesitation in his voice, the crack in their confidence that only a trained eye could catch. The third man, near the entrance, tensed his shoulders, sensing that their target's composure was not as fragile as they expected. Sarah could see the shift in energy between them, the way dominance was subtly being contested, even before any physical action occurred. She shifted slightly in her seat, adjusting the bag beside her in natural motion. This was deliberate, a subtle signal that she was aware, alert, and prepared. Most people would not notice. But anyone trained in observation would recognize the micro-movements of someone ready to act. Her eyes never left the three men, scanning not just them, but the space around them. Exits, potential obstacles, other patrons, they were all part of her mental map. She wasn't just reacting. She was predicting, calculating, waiting for the first misstep that would allow her to regain control. The first man leaned in slightly closer, arrogance written in every line of his posture. "You gonna answer me, or are you just gonna sit there and stare?" he said, the edge of threat creeping into his voice. Sarah finally spoke, her tone calm, low, and measured. "I don't want trouble," she said, not as a warning, but as a statement. There was no fear in her voice. Instead, there was a quiet authority, an unspoken confidence that made the men hesitate for just a heartbeat. The barista glanced over nervously, sensing tension, though she couldn't yet grasp its full significance. The second man moved closer, apparently emboldened by his friend's perception that Sarah was unassuming. "Trouble? You already brought it," he said, smirking. Sarah's gaze sharpened, scanning the subtle shifts in their weight and balance. Each of them was overconfident, each exposed in different ways. She recognized their miscalculation immediately. They had assumed her size and civilian appearance implied weakness. They had no idea that beneath the surface, she possessed the skill, experience, and decisiveness to neutralize them in seconds. A brief pause fell over the trio. The first man's smirk faltered ever so slightly. He hadn't expected the calm, measured tone, the lack of fear in her response. The stocky man, sensing hesitation from his partner, shifted uneasily, while the third man's hand twitched slightly near his waistband, testing his own assumptions. Their confidence was still there, but cracks had begun to appear subtle, nearly imperceptible, but visible to someone trained to see them. Sarah leaned back slightly, letting her calm exterior mask the storm of readiness inside. She continued to observe, noting the subtle movements of their eyes, the minor adjustments in posture, the way their breathing had become just a fraction heavier. These were all signs of the body reacting to perceived threat subconscious signals she could exploit. The tension in the cafe was invisible to the casual observer, yet it was real and potent, coiling in the air like a snake ready to strike. She finished her coffee slowly, deliberately letting the warmth of the cup center her senses. There was a rhythm in all of this, a dance of observation, anticipation, and timing. She had been in far worse situations in her life, and she understood instinctively that this was not the time for haste. The three men had underestimated her. They didn't know what she could do. And that ignorance, she knew, would soon cost them dearly. The cafe's other patrons continued their routines, some glancing occasionally at the men, but mostly remaining unaware of the storm brewing in the corner. Sarah's eyes moved fluidly between the three, watching for microsignals, preparing herself mentally for whatever move they might attempt first. She was patient, deliberate, and controlled. In her mind, she replayed scenarios, strategies, and potential outcomes, ensuring that when the time came, she would strike with precision, not panic. And as the trio of men lingered, confident and predatory, Sarah Hayes allowed herself one small, knowing smile. She wasn't afraid. They had chosen the wrong target. And very soon, they would realize the consequences of that mistake. The three men had finished their orders at the counter, their coffee in hand, but their eyes never strayed far from Sarah's corner booth. Every step they took across the cafe was deliberate, a subtle but unmistakable move to assert dominance over the space. To the casual onlooker, it might have seemed like simple clumsiness or curiosity. But Sarah's eyes caught everything. The way their shoulders tensed as they approached, the slight hesitation in their gait when they passed other patrons, the deliberate blocking of exit routes. The pattern was unmistakable. They intended to corner her. She shifted slightly in her seat, as if adjusting for comfort, but the movement was calculated, measured. Her back remained straight, her posture casual, yet fully alert. Years of military training had taught her to control every micro-movement, to remain unremarkable, yet prepared. The men had no idea that the calm, petite woman in the corner was a tactical expert, trained in hand-to-hand combat, situational awareness, and rapid decision-making. They were playing a dangerous game, and the first move would be theirs. The tallest man, the one with the tattoo curling along his forearm, approached first, his swagger attempting to intimidate. He pulled out a chair beside Sarah's booth and slid it out slowly, as if to block her escape. "Mind if I sit?" he asked, his voice laced with false charm. Sarah did not respond. Her gaze lifted calmly to meet his, steady and unflinching. She allowed the silence to stretch, letting it settle over the table like a pressure point. Most people would have squirmed. Most people would have apologized or tried to diffuse the situation with words. Not her. The second man, broad and stocky, moved to her side, hovering near the table, pretending to examine the menu on the wall. His presence was aggressive, a physical attempt to encroach, to establish dominance. Sarah noted his stance, the angle of his feet, the subtle shift in his weight signals of how he might move, strike, or grab. Every detail mattered. Her breathing remained calm, controlled. She did not panic. She did not flinch. The men were testing her, unaware that she had already anticipated every possible scenario. The third man, wiry and dark-haired, remained near the entrance, his stance casual but alert. He was controlling the egress, ensuring no one could intervene, ensuring their plan remained uninterrupted. Yet even as he leaned casually, Sarah detected the micro-signals of unease, the twitch of his fingers, the slight narrowing of his eyes. Even the most confident predators show cracks under observation, and she was trained to notice them instantly. Time slowed. Every second stretched, waited with the tension of anticipation. The cafe's other patrons were oblivious, still absorbed in their morning routines. Laptops clicked, newspapers rustled, spoons clinked against cups. To them, it was an ordinary day. But in the corner, the dynamics of predator and prey were unfolding with deadly precision. Sarah had become a calm center in a storm of potential violence, her mind mapping every escape route, every possible attack, every contingency. The tallest man leaned in closer, lowering his voice. "Hey, come on, answer me," he said, a mix of impatience and arrogance in his tone. His hand rested near the edge of the table, a subtle, subconscious threat. Sarah allowed herself a slow, deliberate smile, small and almost imperceptible. "I already answered," she said quietly. "I don't want trouble." Her voice was low, firm, but not loud enough to draw immediate attention. It was a statement of fact, not a plea. The stocky man scoffed, leaning a shoulder against the wall beside her booth. "You think you can just ignore us?" he muttered under his breath. He tried to appear casual, but his eyes betrayed his uncertainty. He could sense that his usual tactics, intimidation, volume, proximity, were failing. Sarah's calm and composure were disrupting the rhythm he expected. In every way, she was denying them the control they sought. Sarah's fingers rested lightly on her tote, but she did not move to grab anything. Her preparation was mental first. Action was only the final step. She studied their stances, their dominant hands, their likely movements. In her mind, she mapped the space around her, the table edge, the chairs, the counter, even the floor patterns that could affect balance or leverage. She was already planning the sequence of actions that would neutralize the threat before it could escalate. The tallest man's smirk faltered slightly. He had anticipated fear, compliance, or at least hesitation, but found only calm, focused observation. He leaned a little closer, closer than was necessary for conversation. and Sarah tilted her head fractionally, as if welcoming the challenge. It was subtle, a minor movement, but enough to communicate that she was fully aware of his presence and ready for what might come. The stocky man noticed it too, and a flicker of doubt crossed his face. The wiry man finally moved a step forward, closing the gap near the exit. He spoke low, trying to sound casual. "Come on, don't play dumb." Sarah's eyes followed him, noting the tension in his forearm, the slight bend in his knees. He was expecting compliance. He was expecting hesitation. He would not get it. She allowed the faintest shrug, a gesture of effortless readiness, masking her heightened awareness and precise calculation. The cafe air seemed heavier, charged with silent tension. Mugs rattled lightly as a waiter placed a cup on a nearby table, unaware of the imminent confrontation. Sarah's mind raced at a quiet, deliberate speed. Every second counted. Every gesture could escalate or de-escalate the situation. The men were moving into position for confrontation, confident that their physical presence alone would intimidate her. Then, as if sensing the first strike, Sarah's entire body shifted subtly, just enough to signal readiness without alarming the other patrons. Her back pressed slightly against the booth, her legs positioned for balance, her arms relaxed but prepared. The smallest micro-movement could communicate dominance in combat training. This was her silent way of telling them she was no ordinary target. The tallest man finally reached for the edge of the table, attempting to assert control, to physically impose himself. His fingers brushed her wrist, a small but deliberate invasion of space. Sarah's muscles tensed imperceptibly, ready to react. The other two men mirrored his approach, their postures synchronized yet clumsy, lacking the precision of trained combat. They had underestimated her entirely. They did not yet know that she could neutralize the threat in seconds, with no weapons, no shouting, no wasted energy. As the first physical contact occurred, seemingly minor brush against her wrist, the tension in the cafe snapped. Sarah acted instinctively, but with disciplined control, positioning herself for leverage while keeping her actions measured. Every movement would have consequences. Every motion required precision. The patrons around her remained oblivious to the storm building in their midst, unaware that they were mere spectators to a moment that would quickly shift from intimidation to confrontation. The tallest man, confident in his assumed dominance, leaned in further, unaware of the miscalculation he had made. He was about to find that the calm, composed woman he had cornered was far more than she appeared. His friends, attempting to mirror his aggression, were equally unprepared for the sequence of skill, strategy, and precision that Sarah was about to unleash. And in that moment, a quiet morning in the San Diego Café was about to explode into chaos, a test of instincts, training, and courage that would leave everyone inside stunned and irrevocably changed. The brush of the tallest man's fingers against her wrist sent a ripple of awareness through Sarah's body. It was a minor touch, innocuous to anyone untrained, but to her, it was the unmistakable first step toward escalation. Her eyes locked on his, calm, unblinking, communicating both awareness and readiness. She didn't flinch, didn't jerk away. Instead, she allowed the tiniest pause, a fraction of a heartbeat, to stretch between them. It was a silent warning. She was aware, she was prepared, and she did not intend to be intimidated. "Don't," she said quietly, almost a murmur, but firm. There was no pleading, no desperation, only a simple, absolute statement. The cafe seemed to hold its breath. Other patrons continued with their morning routines, oblivious to the storm building in their midst. But for the three men, the words struck an unfamiliar note, resistance without fear. They expected a reaction, flinching, cowering, or at least hesitation. Instead, Sarah's calm composure made them uneasy, their confidence starting to fracture. The tallest man leaned closer, misinterpreting her silence and steady gaze as the hesitation he expected. "Or what?" he sneered, a challenge laced with overconfidence. The stockier man shuffled slightly, glancing at his friend as if seeking confirmation that this display of authority was normal. The wiry man at the entrance adjusted his stance, his hand lingering near his waistband, ready to back up his friends. All three believed their physical presence alone could intimidate her. They were about to learn differently. Sarah's eyes flicked between them, reading the subtle micro-movements, dominant hand positioning, balance shifts, minor signs of aggression. Every detail mattered. She had trained for this countless times, scenarios designed to simulate precisely this. A small, seemingly vulnerable civilian confronted by multiple aggressors. Yet nothing in those exercises compared to the adrenaline that spiked in real life. It sharpened her senses, honed her focus, and made her hyper-aware of the environment and the people around her. The tallest man reached again, more insistently this time, his fingers grazing her wrist with deliberate force. Sarah's muscles tensed subtly, ready to respond. She did not move prematurely, did not make a sound. Instead, she allowed the micro-movement to register fully, noting exactly how he balanced his weight, how far his arm extended, and the angle of his grip. Then, with precision born of years in the Navy, she acted. In one fluid motion, Sarah twisted her wrist sharply while shifting her weight, sending the tallest man stumbling forward, completely off balance. He fell into the edge of the table, crashing onto the floor with a loud thud that rattled coffee mugs and startled the cafe's other patrons. A gasp rippled through the room, and every head turned toward the corner booth, eyes wide in disbelief. What had been a simple act of intimidation had transformed in an instant into a demonstration of lethal skill. The stocky man froze, shock and disbelief flashing across his face. His overconfidence had been shattered in a heartbeat. He moved instinctively toward Sarah, likely intending to intervene or support his friend, but she was already positioned perfectly. Her stance shifted slightly, maintaining balance and control, as her eyes flicked to him. Every microsecond counted. The smallest hesitation or miscalculation on his part would give her the advantage, and she had trained to capitalize on exactly this moment. The wiry man at the entrance tensed, realizing something was wrong. The sudden fall of the tallest man disrupted their perceived hierarchy of control. He took a cautious step forward, testing the situation, but Sarah's gaze alone caused him to hesitate. Years of experience had taught her that intimidation often worked better than violence at first. Her calm authority and confidence radiated outward, destabilizing the aggressors before she even needed to make a move. The stocky man lunged forward, attempting to grab her shoulder. Sarah sidestepped smoothly, a motion so quick and precise that it seemed almost impossible to follow with the naked eye. As she pivoted, she used his forward momentum to her advantage, twisting his arm behind his back and forcing him toward the edge of the booth. The sound of grunts and the scrape of shoes against wood echoed in the cafe. Patrons stared in awe and horror as the woman they assumed was an unremarkable customer methodically neutralized her attackers. Sarah's movements were deliberate, controlled, and efficient. Every strike, twist, and pivot minimized risk while maximizing leverage. The tall man groaned as he struggled to rise from the floor, dazed and off balance. The stocky man, pinned against the booth, realized that brute strength alone could not overcome her skill. Even the wiry man, who had remained on the perimeter, hesitated, calculating how to intervene without getting hurt. All three were trapped in a mental and physical triangle of their own making, unable to anticipate her precise timing and movements. "Stop," Sarah said, her voice calm but carrying an unmistakable edge. She didn't shout. She didn't need to. The weight in her words, the authority in her presence, and the swift precision of her actions communicated a single truth. Any further aggression would be met with consequences they could not endure. The cafe was silent now, save for the low groans of the men on the floor. Coffee cups trembled, chairs shifted, and even the barista had frozen mid-step, watching in disbelief. The tallest man tried to rise, his hand brushing a fallen chair as he attempted to steady himself. Sarah moved toward him with precise efficiency, catching his wrist and applying a controlled twist that forced him back down. Pain radiated through his arm and shoulder, sharp but controlled. "I said stop," she repeated, each word deliberate. He realized in that moment that this was no ordinary woman. She was trained, disciplined, and unyielding. Every instinct he had relied upon to dominate others was failing spectacularly. The stocky man groaned under her leverage, his movements hampered by the precise positioning of her hands and weight. He tried to push back, but she countered effortlessly, using balance and physics rather than brute strength. The wiry man, sensing the shift in power, hesitated near the doorway, uncertain how to intervene. It was the first crack in their confidence, and it widened with every passing second. Sarah's composure and skill had changed the dynamic entirely. Sarah allowed herself a momentary glance around the cafe. Patrons were frozen in place, whispering in disbelief, phones raised to capture the scene. None dared intervene, but all were fully aware that what they were witnessing was extraordinary. She did not break her focus, however, and did not let the attention affect her actions. Her goal was singular: neutralize the threat, maintain control, and ensure no one else was harmed. With a final, fluid motion, she sent the tallest man sprawling fully to the floor, disoriented and unable to rise quickly. The stocky man, realizing he was next, attempted a desperate grab, only to be redirected with an elbow to the torso and a swift sweep of his legs. Both were incapacitated without the use of weapons, caught completely off guard by her speed, precision, and control. The wiry man at the entrance now hesitated entirely, the arrogance that had fueled his aggression replaced by a dawning terror. In less than a minute, the three men, once confident, cocky, and threatening, lay on the floor of the cafe, groaning, humiliated, and stunned. Sarah Hayes stood in the corner, calm, composed, and unscathed. She did not gloat, did not shout, did not celebrate. She simply adjusted her hair, straightened her sweatshirt, and returned to the seat as if nothing had happened. The cafe erupted into whispers, eyes wide with disbelief, as patrons slowly processed the display of skill they had just witnessed. For Sarah, it was just another morning. She had neutralized a threat, maintained control, and protected herself without unnecessary escalation. The three men had made a fatal mistake in underestimating her. And in the quiet aftermath, the lesson was clear. Appearances can be deceiving, and those who assume dominance through intimidation alone often pay the price. The cafe had descended into a tense, electric silence. Patrons froze mid-sip, some gripping the edges of their tables, others whispering in disbelief. The three men, once confident and cocky, lay sprawled on the floor, groaning and clutching limbs that were aching from Sarah's precise maneuvers. Yet the wiry man by the entrance had not been fully engaged. His eyes flicked nervously between the fallen friends and the woman who had dismantled them effortlessly. Pride, arrogance, and the instinct to dominate battled with fear, hesitation, and the dawning realization that he had underestimated her completely. Sarah's eyes shifted smoothly to him. He was small, wiry, and quick, a different kind of opponent. The first two men had relied on brute strength and intimidation, but this one was calculating, more likely to strike impulsively or exploit a perceived weakness. Sarah adjusted her posture slightly, distributing her weight evenly, keeping her center of gravity low and balanced. Her movements were subtle but deliberate, every step, every shift, calculated to maintain readiness and control. She had been here before, in far more dangerous scenarios, and her instincts were honed to react with precision under pressure. The wiry man's hand twitched near his waistband, searching for leverage, a potential weapon, anything that could shift the dynamic back in his favor. Sarah noted the motion instantly, her eyes narrowing subtly. This man lacked the overconfidence of his friends. His approach was cautious, but that made him unpredictable. Sarah didn't panic. Her training emphasized adaptability, anticipate, read, and act decisively. She allowed him a momentary step closer, just enough to provoke a movement, and then shifted her weight, preparing to neutralize him before he could react fully. He lunged suddenly, quick and desperate, trying to grab her arm. Sarah sidestepped fluidly, letting his momentum carry him forward, while she pivoted and used his energy against him. A low grunt escaped him as he stumbled, his footing compromised, and he nearly collided with the counter. Patrons gasped. A coffee cup teetered dangerously on the edge of a table before Sarah subtly shifted, preventing it from toppling. Even in combat, she maintained awareness of her surroundings, protecting innocent bystanders while controlling the threat. The wiry man recovered quickly, circling her cautiously now, trying to anticipate her next move. His eyes darted for openings, searching for vulnerabilities. Sarah's own gaze never wavered, fluidly tracking his stance, the angle of his feet, the positioning of his hands. She mirrored his movements subtly, maintaining a calm but dominant presence, ensuring he understood that she was fully aware of every action and reaction. Her quiet confidence was a weapon as effective as any physical strike. He feigned a lunge to her left, but Sarah anticipated the motion instinctively. In one smooth, almost imperceptible movement, she stepped to her right, caught his wrist, and twisted sharply. The wiry man yelped as she leveraged his own momentum to send him sprawling toward the edge of the booth. He hit the wooden frame with a solid thud, winded but not incapacitated. Sarah didn't hesitate. She followed through with controlled precision, sweeping his legs with her foot to keep him grounded. Each action was deliberate, minimizing effort while maximizing control. The cafe was in chaos now, though the patrons remained frozen in fascination. Chairs had shifted, a spilled cup of coffee left a dark stain on the floor, and the three men groaned, partially immobilized by their own pain. Yet the wiry man continued to rise, testing her patience and skill, hoping to exploit a perceived weakness. Sarah's breathing remained steady, controlled, her eyes unwavering. She knew that hesitation now would allow him a brief window of opportunity, and she could not afford it. He lunged again, faster this time, hands aiming for her shoulders, a desperate attempt to overpower her. Sarah pivoted on the balls of her feet, sidestepping his grab while simultaneously delivering a swift elbow strike to his midsection. The sound of impact echoed through the cafe, startling patrons and drawing a sharp intake of breath from the barista. The wiry man bent forward, clutching his ribs, staggering, his balance compromised. He had learned, in the shortest possible time, that she was not only faster, but far more skilled than he had anticipated. Sarah shifted again, closing the gap and using his momentum to sweep him off his feet entirely. He crashed onto the floor near the counter, groaning and twisting in pain as she applied a controlled pressure on his shoulder to prevent any immediate retaliation. The three men now lay defeated, sprawled across the floor of the cafe, unable to coordinate or act effectively. Sarah took a small, deliberate step back, allowing them to register the outcome. Their threat had been neutralized completely, and she stood calm, unscathed, and in total control. The cafe was utterly silent for a moment. The patrons, initially frozen in shock, slowly began to murmur among themselves, voices filled with disbelief and awe. Phones discreetly rose to capture the scene, though no one dared intervene. The barista, hands trembling slightly, whispered to a coworker, "Did she just?" The other nodded, equally stunned. Sarah, fully aware of the attention, did not break her composure. She had acted decisively, efficiently, and effectively. No unnecessary movements, no wasted energy, no excessive force beyond what was required. The wiry man attempted a weak rise, testing his own resolve, but Sarah's eyes met his with unwavering authority. She spoke quietly, her voice low but carrying a weight that demanded compliance. "Stay down." This simple command, backed by the demonstration of skill he had just witnessed, caused him to hesitate, unsure whether to risk further engagement. Every instinct in his body screamed at him to retreat, and for once, his instincts were correct. The first two men groaned, still struggling to recover their balance, realizing fully that the situation had escalated far beyond their control. They had underestimated her, and the consequences were evident. Pain, humiliation, and fear had replaced the confidence they had carried moments before. Sarah's presence alone, combined with precise, controlled movements, had shifted the dynamic entirely. The lesson was clear. Underestimating someone based on appearance could have immediate, tangible consequences. Sarah surveyed the room one final time, ensuring no other threats remained. Patrons' eyes followed her movements, wide with disbelief. She adjusted her sweatshirt, brushed a strand of hair from her face, and allowed herself a small, measured exhale. The fight had ended. The threat was neutralized. Her opponents were incapacitated not by brute force alone, but by skill, precision, and superior situational awareness. She had maintained control, protected others, and restored order in a matter of moments. For the first time since entering the café, she allowed herself to enjoy a sense of quiet satisfaction. The three men, once arrogant and threatening, now lay groaning and humiliated on the floor. The wiry man, still clutching his ribs, understood fully that he had faced someone extraordinary. Sarah Hayes had turned a potentially dangerous situation into a display of calm authority, controlled force, and unmatched skill. And as she stepped back into her booth, returning to her coffee as if nothing had occurred, the cafe patrons realized one undeniable truth. Appearances were deceiving, and ordinary-looking people often hid extraordinary capabilities. Sarah's calm, measured actions had neutralized the threat completely, leaving behind not just defeated aggressors, but a stunned audience, witnessing firsthand the skill and precision of a Navy warrior operating in civilian life. The quiet morning that had begun so peacefully had been irrevocably transformed. The lesson was clear. Never underestimate someone who moves with quiet confidence, and never assume that composure equates to vulnerability. In the aftermath of chaos, Sarah sat, calm and collected, a figure of control and competence in the midst of stunned onlookers, prepared for whatever might come next. The café was silent. For a few heartbeats, the only sounds were the groans and strained breaths of the three men sprawled across the floor, the soft shuffle of chairs settling back into place, and the occasional drip of coffee from a toppled cup. Patrons sat frozen, mouths agape, eyes wide, unsure whether to react, move, or even breathe. Time seemed to stretch as if the very air had thickened in awe and disbelief. What had been a quiet morning, ordinary and routine, had erupted into chaos. Yet in the midst of it all stood one figure, calm, composed, and utterly unshaken. Sarah Hayes sat back in her booth, her posture relaxed but alert. She slowly reached for her coffee, lifting it as if she had never moved an aggressor with such precision moments before. Her hands were steady, her breathing measured, and her expression serene. She had neutralized three would-be attackers without a single misstep, without the use of a weapon, and without unnecessary force. The cafe patrons, still processing what they had witnessed, found themselves drawn to her composure, unable to look away even as their minds struggled to comprehend the events that had just unfolded. The tallest man, groaning and clutching his arm, slowly tried to rise, only to falter under the weight of pain and humiliation. The stocky man remained pinned, partially against the edge of the booth, his confidence shattered. The wiry man, finally sitting upright, leaned back against the wall, sweat glistening on his forehead, his chest heaving as he realized the magnitude of his miscalculation. They had all underestimated her entirely, assuming that appearances alone dictated strength, that size and bravado would intimidate a woman they had judged as weak. They had been wrong. Whispers began to ripple through the cafe. Did she just? One patron murmured, barely audible. I think yeah. She took them down, another replied, voice tinged with awe. Phones lifted hesitantly, capturing shaky footage, though no one dared approach. The barista, standing behind the counter, slowly lowered a coffee pot that had trembled in his hands, his eyes wide as he whispered to a coworker, I don't believe that just happened. The ordinary cafe environment had transformed into a stage for an extraordinary demonstration of skill, courage, and discipline. Sarah's eyes swept the room, noting every reaction, every whisper, every expression of disbelief. She allowed herself the tiniest hint of a smile, not from vanity, but from the quiet satisfaction of a situation fully controlled. Her training had prepared her for far more dangerous scenarios, hostile territory, ambushes, unexpected attacks, and situations where failure meant life or death. But the principles remained the same: observation, timing, precision, and control. Every movement she had made was deliberate, calculated, and perfectly executed. A few brave patrons began murmuring in admiration. That was incredible, one said softly. Another nodded, still staring at Sarah, eyes wide. The cafe, once ordinary, now felt like a theater where the climax had already occurred, leaving the audience stunned in awe. Sarah, aware of their attention, allowed the moment to stretch just long enough to reinforce the lesson. She was in control. Her calm demeanor, even after neutralizing the threat, reinforced the stark contrast between her and the would-be aggressors. The three men began to stir slightly, groaning and attempting to regain composure. Pain radiated through their limbs, humiliation heavier than the bruises they now carried. They realized fully that their attack had been not only futile, but catastrophic for their own pride. The tallest man looked at his companions, expression mingling fear, disbelief, and shame. They had walked in confident, expecting compliance, and had been dismantled effortlessly by someone they had assumed would be weak. Their world, if only for a moment, had shifted entirely. Sarah finally set her coffee back down, adjusting her sweatshirt and brushing a strand of hair from her face. Her movements were deliberate, calm, and natural, as if she had been sitting there all along, sipping coffee and waiting for a quiet morning. Yet her presence radiated authority. Even those who had witnessed only fragments of the fight instinctively understood that she had acted with control, precision, and immense skill. She had neutralized the threat, protected herself and others, and maintained order, all without panic, aggression, or chaos beyond what the aggressors had caused themselves. The cafe's barista finally spoke, his voice shaking slightly. Do you need help? He asked hesitantly, glancing toward the three men still groaning on the floor. Sarah shook her head gently. No, she replied, calm, measured. They're fine. I've got it. The words were simple, yet carried the authority of someone who had faced far greater threats than a cafe brawl. The barista nodded, still in awe, stepping back to give her space while subtly checking to ensure none of the patrons attempted to intervene. A few patrons began speaking quietly among themselves, reflecting on what they had witnessed. I've never seen anything like that, one whispered. It was like she knew exactly what to do before they even moved. Another murmured, I thought they were going to hurt her. And then she just handled it, The disbelief was palpable. In a city full of ordinary mornings, this one had become unforgettable. Sarah's quiet competence had left a mark on everyone present, and the story would linger far longer than the coffee aroma in the air. Meanwhile, the three men began to realize the full extent of their failure. The wiry man, who had remained cautious but defiant, now slumped fully against the wall, his face pale. The stocky man groaned, rubbing his ribs, and the tallest man sat upright, shaking his head in disbelief. They had underestimated her entirely, and in doing so, they had learned the hardest lesson of all. Appearances are often deceiving, and confidence without skill is meaningless. Sarah remained in her booth, sipping her now cool coffee, observing the aftermath with calm detachment. She allowed herself a single thought. Patience, precision, and awareness were more powerful than brute force. Every movement, every calculated response had brought the situation under control in moments. She had neutralized the threat, protected others, and maintained dominance without unnecessary aggression. The café, once ordinary, had become a silent theater where her training, experience, and discipline were on full display. As she gathered her things to leave, Sarah's eyes scanned the room one final time. Patrons who had initially whispered in shock now stared in admiration, some cautiously nodding, others silently acknowledging the presence of someone extraordinary in their midst. The three men, now subdued and humiliated, were a testament to the consequences of underestimating her. She had maintained control from the first warning to the last movement, and the lesson was clear. Never assume weakness based on appearances. With deliberate grace, Sarah stood, adjusted her tote, and moved toward the exit. Every step was measured, calm, and purposeful. She did not rush, she did not falter, and she did not look back. The café remained in stunned silence, the patrons processing the extraordinary display of skill they had just witnessed. In a matter of moments, an ordinary morning had transformed into an unforgettable lesson in composure, precision, and quiet authority. As she stepped out into the sunlight of downtown San Diego, the noise of the city returned. Traffic hummed, pedestrians passed, and the world continued as though nothing extraordinary had occurred. Yet inside that café, everyone knew differently. They had witnessed a Navy warrior in civilian life, capable of extraordinary feats of skill and control, and they would not soon forget it. By the time Sarah stepped outside the café, the morning sun had climbed higher in the sky, illuminating the streets of San Diego with a warm glow. To most passers-by, it was an ordinary day, the kind where people moved with purpose, yet without urgency. Yet inside that small café, the ordinary had transformed into something extraordinary. Patrons and bystanders alike were still processing what they had witnessed, a quiet, unassuming woman neutralizing three aggressive men with speed, precision, and skill that seemed almost unreal. Whispers had already spread, some patrons daring to recount fragments of the encounter to one another. "Did you see that? She just took them down like it was nothing." A young woman whispered, her voice a mix of awe and disbelief. A man in a business suit nodded, still leaning slightly forward, as if leaning closer to reality might make the event more tangible. "I don't even know how she did it," he admitted, eyes wide. The collective shock and admiration were palpable, and the story was beginning to take on a life of its own, circulating quickly among those who had been witnesses. Sarah's calm exterior concealed her awareness of the ripple effect she was creating. She had faced countless emergencies in her life, hostile territories, armed combat, high-stakes missions where hesitation meant death. Yet in all of those situations, the principles remained the same: control, precision, and decisiveness. Her actions had neutralized a threat without unnecessary escalation, and in doing so, she had left a lasting impression on everyone present. The three men had begun to sit up, bruised, battered, and humiliated, They were silent, their earlier bravado replaced by the stark reality of defeat. Their arrogance had crumbled under the weight of skill, experience, and composure. They had underestimated her entirely, assuming that her appearance, a casual hoodie, jeans, and a calm demeanor indicated weakness. They had been catastrophically wrong. The realization of this mistake was clear in their expressions, a mixture of fear, disbelief, and shame. One of the cafe patrons, emboldened by the clarity of what they had witnessed, approached the trio cautiously. "Are you okay?" they asked softly, concern blending with curiosity. The tallest man groaned and shook his head, unable to form words, while the stocky man rubbed his ribs, still wincing from the precision of her maneuvers. The wiry man finally muttered something under his breath, a garbled acknowledgement of defeat. They were not merely hurt. They were thoroughly humbled. Meanwhile, attention slowly turned back to Sarah. Patrons were now openly observing her, murmuring in hushed tones about the remarkable display of skill. She's trained," one whispered. "There's no way she just did that naturally." A few others nodded in agreement, recognition dawning slowly. Her composure, timing, and flawless execution spoke of years of professional experience far beyond anything they had encountered in civilian life. At that moment, a young man from a nearby table spoke louder than he intended, perhaps unable to contain his curiosity. "Are you military?" he asked, voice tinged with both awe and uncertainty. Sarah's eyes flicked to him, calm and steady. For the first time, she allowed a small acknowledgement, a hint that her background was not as ordinary as it appeared. "Yes," she replied simply, voice quiet but carrying authority. "Navy." The single word hung in the air, carrying the weight of her experience and credentials. The realization hit the patrons immediately. The speed, precision, and composure they had witnessed were no accident. This was not luck, not instinct alone. It was professional training, honed over years of disciplined service in environments far more dangerous than a cafe in San Diego. Whispers turned into exclamations of respect and admiration. "A Navy officer in here." "Wow," one muttered. "No wonder she handled that so effortlessly," another said, nodding. The sense of awe was almost tangible. Even the three defeated men registered the revelation. Their expressions shifted from disbelief to fear and then grudging respect. They had walked in assuming dominance, expecting to intimidate a civilian. Instead, they had encountered someone with training, skill, and composure that far exceeded anything they had anticipated. The lesson was clear. Never judge strength by appearance. Never assume arrogance or size guarantees control, and never underestimate someone who moves with quiet confidence. Sarah allowed herself a brief moment of reflection. She had been trained to act decisively, to neutralize threats quickly, and to protect herself and others without hesitation. That training had guided every movement, every pivot, every strike. Yet now, she observed the ripple effect, how her actions, her skill, and her calm authority had inspired awe, respect, and even humility in those around her. In that small café, her presence had shifted perceptions, leaving an indelible mark on everyone present. A few patrons, emboldened, began to speak directly to her, admiration and curiosity intertwining. How did you do that?" a young woman asked. "I've never seen anything like it." Sarah smiled faintly, a small, controlled expression that conveyed both humility and confidence. "Training and experience," she replied, "and knowing when to act." The simplicity of her answer only deepened the respect of those listening. They could see, now that her composure had not been natural luck, it had been forged through discipline, practice, and real-life challenges. Word of her identity and the events in the cafe spread quickly. Patrons who had not witnessed the confrontation firsthand were now hearing about it through hushed conversations and social media posts. A buzz of admiration and astonishment began to build beyond the cafe walls. Sarah had become, if only briefly, a figure of fascination, a civilian Navy officer demonstrating extraordinary skill and calm under pressure. Her actions were not performative. They were necessary, precise, and effective, yet the impact was undeniable. Even the barista, finally recovering from shock, approached cautiously. I just wanted to say, thank you, he stammered. You handled that so well. You could have been hurt. Sarah nodded, acknowledging the sentiment without distraction. It's important to stay calm, she said simply, and to control the situation before it escalates. Her words were practical, grounded in experience, yet carried an authority that reinforced the admiration building around her. The three men, now fully subdued, had no choice but to accept the reality of their defeat. Their arrogance, once overwhelming, had been dismantled completely. They had assumed dominance, underestimated her, and paid the consequences. Sarah had not only defended herself, but had demonstrated to all present the effectiveness of training, composure, and decisiveness. Their silence, coupled with the patron's admiration, created a stark contrast, a lesson in humility and respect that would linger far longer than any bruises or pain. As the morning sun rose higher, casting warm light across the streets, Sarah collected her tote, adjusted her jacket, and prepared to leave. Her presence had transformed an ordinary cafe visit into an unforgettable display of skill, authority, and quiet heroism. Patrons continued to whisper, some capturing footage, others simply absorbing the gravity of what they had witnessed. Her identity as a Navy officer, previously unknown, had been revealed through action rather than proclamation, leaving an enduring impression of competence, strength, and control. Sarah stepped onto the street, the ordinary noise of traffic and pedestrians resuming around her, yet inside the cafe, the reverberations of her actions lingered. Stories would be told, lessons learned, and respect earned. She had not sought recognition, but it came naturally, earned through skill, composure, and decisive action. Her calm authority had not only neutralized a threat, but had also reshaped perceptions, leaving an indelible mark on everyone who had witnessed her extraordinary capabilities. The sunlight fell warmly across the streets of San Diego as Sarah Hayes stepped away from the cafe, her tote slung over her shoulder, and her movements calm, deliberate, and purposeful. The air was filled with the hum of everyday life. Traffic, chatter, distant footsteps. To the unobservant, it was simply another morning. Yet inside the cafe, and in the minds of those who had witnessed the extraordinary sequence of events just minutes earlier, time seemed to have shifted. They had seen something remarkable, courage, skill, and discipline brought to bear in the quietest, most precise way imaginable. Behind her, the cafe remained a scene of stunned astonishment. Patrons had begun whispering to one another, recounting fragments of the confrontation over and over as if trying to confirm that what they had witnessed was real. Did she really just... I can't believe it. Those guys didn't stand a chance. A Navy officer. In a cafe, and she took them all down? Each repetition carried a mix of awe, disbelief, and respect. It was the kind of story that would be retold countless times, growing slightly in legend with every telling. Sarah paused briefly at the corner, glancing back. The three would-be aggressors were still on the floor, groaning, bruised, humiliated, and silent. Even as she had moved toward the door, she had maintained an awareness of them, a habit ingrained through years of tactical training. She knew when to act, how to neutralize a threat, and when the threat was fully subdued. The three men had been incapacitated with precision, and now the danger was gone. Yet in her mind, she catalogued every detail. Their behavior, their movements, the mistakes they had made. It was more than memory. It was study. Every encounter was a lesson, every miscalculation a confirmation of why training and awareness mattered. As she walked down the street, the whispers from the cafe lingered in her mind only briefly. Her focus was forward, attuned to the environment, scanning potential obstacles, exits, and the flow of pedestrians. Even in a civilian environment, a Navy-trained mind never fully relaxed. Yet there was also a sense of satisfaction, a quiet acknowledgement of a job well done. The confrontation had been handled efficiently, decisively, and without unnecessary escalation. Every principle she had trained for control, precision, timing, and calm authority had guided her actions seamlessly. Meanwhile, inside the cafe, the patrons had begun to regain a semblance of normalcy. Chairs were righted, a few spilled coffee stains wiped up, and murmured conversations began to fill the space. Yet the energy remained altered. Something extraordinary had occurred, and every observer felt the lingering impact. Some patrons attempted to comfort one another, still wide-eyed with disbelief. "I can't get over it," whispered one young woman, glancing toward the corner where Sarah had sat. She didn't just defend herself. She dominated the situation completely. Even the barista, behind the counter, shook his head in quiet awe. "I've worked here for years," he said to a coworker, voice low but firm. "And I've never seen anything like that. She's something else." His hands still trembled slightly from the adrenaline, the shock of witnessing someone act with such calm authority and perfect precision. Others nodded in agreement, understanding that what they had seen was not just physical skill, but a mastery of situational awareness, discipline, and mental fortitude. The three men, now subdued and nursing both physical pain and wounded pride, were no longer a threat. They had learned, in the harshest possible way, that arrogance and intimidation could be fatally misjudged. Their perception of strength, based solely on appearances and bravado, had been shattered completely. And while the humiliation burned, it was coupled with a grudging respect, even if unspoken. They had faced someone extraordinary, and that fact would linger in their minds far longer than any pain inflicted. Outside, Sarah moved with calm efficiency, crossing streets, blending into the flow of civilians, yet always aware, always alert. She didn't seek attention, nor did she desire recognition. The story of her actions would circulate regardless. And she understood that the lasting impact was in the lesson itself. Composure, training, and experience could neutralize threats efficiently and decisively. And confidence without skill was meaningless. Each step she took reinforced the quiet authority that had defined every movement inside the cafe. Passers-by who had caught fragments of the scene outside or who had seen the aftermath on social media were beginning to murmur in awe. "Did you see that woman?" one said, stopping to recount the details to a friend. She just took 3 men down without hesitation. And she's in the Navy, apparently." The story spread like wildfire, a combination of shock, respect, and fascination. Sarah had become, almost instantly, a figure of admiration, someone whose skill and composure had left an indelible mark on everyone who had witnessed her. As she approached a quiet street corner, Sarah allowed herself a moment of reflection. Each encounter in her life had reinforced the same principles: awareness, control, precision, and calm authority. A cafe incident, while extraordinary, had been a microcosm of the lessons she had learned in far more dangerous environments. Yet the satisfaction was subtle, internal, quiet, a small acknowledgement that her training, discipline, and decision-making had worked flawlessly. Even as the story of the morning spread beyond the cafe walls, Sarah moved with deliberate anonymity. She did not seek recognition or fame. Her presence alone, and the demonstration of skills she had executed, had ensured respect, safety, and the enduring impression of authority. The three men remained inside, subdued, humiliated, and aware that underestimating someone could have consequences far beyond expectation. They would not repeat this mistake, and the lesson would linger longer than any bruise. By the time she reached the end of the block, Sarah paused briefly, glancing over her shoulder one final time. The café, still abuzz with whispers, served as a reminder that ordinary spaces could become extraordinary in an instant. Her actions had reshaped perceptions, not only about physical capability, but also about composure, mental fortitude, and the consequences of underestimation. She had neutralized a threat, maintained control, and left an indelible mark on everyone present, without seeking attention, without fanfare, and without hesitation. With one last deep breath, Sarah continued down the street, blending seamlessly into the rhythm of the city. The ordinary world returned around her, yet the lessons of the morning endured. Patrons would recount the story repeatedly. The three men would carry the memory of their defeat, and those who had witnessed her skill would carry respect, awe, and a renewed understanding of discipline and composure. The day moved forward, and the city hummed with life, but the memory of what had occurred in that small café lingered. Sarah Hayes had not just defended herself. She had demonstrated the quiet power of skill, training, and composure. And while she disappeared into the flow of pedestrians, the impact of her actions remained, a testament to the fact that true strength is measured not by appearance, arrogance, or intimidation, but by mastery, precision, and calm authority in the face of chaos. As the sun climbed higher, Sarah's presence faded from sight, but the story endured. The ordinary café had witnessed something extraordinary, and everyone who had been there knew it. And in the quiet aftermath, a single lesson resonated for all who had observed: underestimate no one, and never mistake composure for weakness.